Welcome. Settle yourself somewhere comfortable and let the world outside grow quiet for a while. Tonight, we return to Dan Simmons' The Fall of Hyperion, the continuation of an epic tale set among the stars, where humanity has spread across countless worlds, connected by instantaneous doorways called Farcasters. When last we visited this universe, 7 pilgrims had journeyed to the distant world of Hyperion, each carrying their own burden of hope and sorrow, drawn by the mysterious creature known as the Shrike. Now, as war erupts between humanity and the enigmatic ousters, their fates hang in the balance. We begin at a grand party on Tau Ceti Center, where the wealthy and powerful have gathered to watch a massive armada launch into battle. Among them moves a quiet artist named Joseph Seven, a man who is not quite what he appears to be, observing the celebrations with knowing eyes. The champagne flows, the fusion drives light up the evening sky, and somewhere in the depths of space, ancient powers are stirring. So let your breathing slow, let your thoughts drift like starlight across the void, and allow this story to carry you gently through the hours ahead. Our tale begins on the very day the hegemony Armada departed for war. Our narrator, the mysterious Joseph Seven, found himself at quite the gathering. Government House on Tau Ceti Center was hosting what might well be the party of the century. Thousands of guests arriving by Farcaster, by rivercraft along the Tethys, by elaborate vehicles of every imaginable design. The evening light cast a warm glow across Deer Park as Seven wandered among the wealthy and powerful, observing them with a detached, almost melancholy eye. He encountered a woman named Diana Philomel, all elegance and hidden cruelty, and here we glimpse something rather extraordinary about our narrator. He can slip into the datasphere as easily as you or I might close our eyes, reading secrets that others believe safely hidden. Her husband Hermond arrived, a brutish fellow who explained the necessity of war in rather colourful terms. The ousters had provoked them, you see, and now the hegemony would answer. Seven listened quietly, remembering schoolyard bullies from another life. When asked to draw Diana's portrait, he obliged, the light pen tracing her features in glowing lines that floated between them. And then the Armada appeared. Scout ships first, their fusion tails like fireflies across the heavens, then torch ships, burning golden trails from zenith to horizon. The crowd erupted in applause and cheering, but Seven did not join them. He simply raised his glass in a private, bitter toast to the enduring foolishness of humanity. And then a security guard approached. CEO Gladstone was ready to see him. And so our narrator found himself ushered into the presence of CEO Minor Gladstone, the most powerful person in a government serving 130 billion souls. The press had long compared her to Abraham Lincoln, but Seven saw something rather different. He saw an old woman with sharp, aquiline features, a beak of a nose, and eyes that held an infinite, weary sadness. The meeting room was lined with wooden shelves holding hundreds of printed books, a rare luxury in this age of data and light. A dozen of the most powerful figures in the hegemony stood in a rough half-circle, generals and senators and ministers, and among them the shimmering projection of a TechnoCore councillor. Gladstone introduced Seven as an artist brought to offer a fresh perspective, which drew a snort of derision from General Morpurgo. But when the CEO asked Seven's opinion of the Armada, he called it pretty, and when she asked about the war itself, he called it stupid. The room fell rather quiet at that. Seven explained his reasoning with calm directness. The hegemony hadn't faced true war in 7 centuries. The ousters were an unknown quantity, and Hyperion itself was different from any previous conflict. The gathered leaders bristled, but Gladstone listened with that sad, knowing expression. After the others departed, the truth emerged in the quiet of that book-lined room. Gladstone and her aide Lee Hunt knew exactly what Seven was, a cybrid, a human form connected to the TechnoCore, and they knew about his dreams that showed him real events unfolding around the Shrike Pilgrims on distant Hyperion. Seven reported what he had seen, Father Hoyt's agony, Martin Silenus's drunken conviction that his poem shaped reality, Colonel Kassad's twin obsessions, Sol Weintraub's infant daughter aging backward toward oblivion, and most significantly, the consul's confession of betraying the hegemony by triggering an ouster device. Gladstone absorbed it all with quiet intensity, then instructed Seven to remain silent and attend the war room meeting. A court artist, nothing more. And so we returned to the Pilgrims, 6 weary souls and 1 small infant, gathered around a dying campfire in the Valley of the Time Tombs. The day had been long and strange and rather anticlimactic, if you can imagine such a thing. They had descended into the valley before dawn, expecting death at every turn, expecting the Shrike to emerge from shadow and claim them. But the hours passed, and nothing came. They explored each tomb in turn, the Sphinx with its narrow labyrinthine passages, the translucent jade tomb, the featureless crystal monolith, the cave tombs carved into distant cliffs, and finally the Shrike Palace itself, all sharp angles and cruel spires. Sol Weintraub wept quietly when he entered the Sphinx, for this was where his daughter Rachel had contracted her terrible illness, all those years ago. Her old research equipment still stood there, silent sentinels waiting for someone who would never return. But of the Shrike itself, there was nothing. Empty rooms, dusty corridors, anticlimax. Now they huddled together in the darkness, connected not just by shared experience but by a web of linked comlogs and biomonitors, watching over one another as best they can. Martin Silenus makes bitter jokes about dying, about how disappointing it would be if the ousters destroyed them before the Shrike could. Braun Lamia, exhausted and irritable, tells him quite firmly to stop talking. Above them, the sky occasionally blooms with silent fire. Distant space battles painting brief flowers of light across the stars. Colonel Kassad watches the display with professional interest, noting that someone is testing hegemony defenses again. And then the sandstorm arrives. It comes with howling wind and stinging particles, with an eerie electrical charge that makes the tomb glow with pale fire, static dancing along the wings of the Sphinx, crawling across the dunes like living things. Braun wakes suddenly in her half-buried tent, knowing something is wrong. Father Hoyt is gone. She finds Kassad standing watch in the storm, and together they spot a figure moving toward the glowing tombs, a black cloak flapping like a wounded bird. Kassad cannot leave his post. The others must be protected. So Braun goes alone, pulling her father's pistol close, wading through silver-lit sand toward the jade tomb, where something waits in the entrance. Something, or someone. And now, we drift away from the valley, away from the Pilgrims and their vigil, to find ourselves in quite a different place entirely. Picture a grey room, all gunmetal surfaces, and flickering displays where the hegemony's most powerful figures have gathered around a horseshoe table. CEO Minor Gladstone sits at its centre, weathered and watchful, while generals and senators arrange themselves according to rank like planets orbiting a quiet sun. Our narrator, Joseph Seven, the artist with his sketchbook, sits on a stool in the far corner. He draws while a young colonel named Yanni delivers his military briefing, pointing at maps and charts, explaining troop movements and casualty figures in that brisk tone military men use when speaking of death. The war against the ousters, it seems, has begun in earnest. Task Force 42 has established a Farcaster connection to the Hyperion system, suffering some 2,300 casualties in the process. Ships destroyed, lives lost, numbers recited with clinical detachment. Gladstone listens carefully, asking the questions others are perhaps too timid to voice. How many ships did the enemy have? How many of ours? What became of the chartered tree ship Yggdrasil? Sabotage, they tell her. Not enemy action, but sabotage. Seven sketches Gladstone's profile, the bulldog face of General Morpurgo behind her, and watches as a map of Hyperion unfolds on the display. The continents are given names: Equus shaped like a horse, Aquila like an eagle, troop positions marked with glowing red dots. But something catches his eye, or rather, something is notably absent. The Time Tombs, that stretch of orange and yellow desert where our pilgrims now shelter, bears no military markings at all, no defensive positions, no strategic significance, nothing. As if that lonely valley has no part to play in these grand proceedings. Yet Seven knows better, doesn't he? He suspects, as perhaps we do too, that the entire war, the movement of fleets, the fate of billions, may ultimately depend upon 6 exhausted souls in that unmarked wilderness. After the briefing ends, Lee Hunt intercepts Seven in the corridor. Gladstone wishes to speak with him again, at his convenience. A curious honour for an artist no one should notice. Seven leaves Government House, finds himself a dark bar on Sol Draconi Septum, and drinks rather too much scotch, while Gladstone's speech plays on a distant screen. And there, in the shadows, Diana Philomel finds him. Diana Philomel, the socialite from that grand party at the start of our tale, leads Seven away from his drink and his brooding thoughts. She speaks of portraits, of promises made, but we shall leave them there for now, for back in the valley of the Time Tombs, events are taking a rather darker turn. Colonel Kassad, you see, has been following Braun Lamia and Father Hoyt through the howling storm. His night vision works perfectly well, despite what he told the others. He trails them like a hunter, using them as bait, hoping to draw out the Shrike, or perhaps the mysterious woman called Mineta. Father Hoyt, poor tormented soul, has wandered deep into the jade tomb's twisting corridors. The pain from his cruciforms has become unbearable, driving him to strip away his priestly garments, to claw at his own flesh, to scream words he hasn't spoken since childhood. When Lamia finally catches up to him, she finds him kneeling in a vast chamber with a transparent floor, flames burning far below, and there, emerging from shadow and fire, stands the Shrike itself. Lamia fires her pistol. Hoyt raises his hand, crying out that the creature grants wishes, but in the space between heartbeats, the Shrike moves, and Father Hoyt, at last, finds release from his pain, and now we find ourselves in rather more intimate circumstances as Joseph Seven awakens in an unfamiliar bedroom. He lies there for a moment, watching the morning light filter through broad windows, the treetops of Renaissance Minor visible in shades of grey and gold beyond. Scattered sheets of drawing paper surround them, hasty sketches from the night before, when art and wine and seduction had mingled together. But this peaceful scene is about to shatter. 2 large men appear in the doorway, hired muscle with the unmistakable build of high-gravity worlders, and Diana Philomel, still in her bed, wears a smile that holds nothing of warmth. What follows is an interrogation, brutal and efficient. They administer truth talk, a drug that compels honest answers, and Seven finds himself unable to resist without abandoning his body entirely. So the truth spills out, piece by piece. He reveals himself as a cybrid, a human form connected to the TechnoCore. He admits his persona is that of John Keats, the poet who died 900 years ago. He explains how he dreams the Pilgrims' experiences through the Keats retrieval persona now roaming Hyperion. And then, pressed further, he reveals something devastating. The Core has predicted the outcome of this war for centuries, the destruction of the hegemony, the unraveling of the world web, perhaps the end of humanity itself. Only Hyperion remains an unknown variable. Diana orders his death, a lethal injection to hide their crime. But Lee Hunt arrives with executive security commandos just in time, pulling Seven from the brink. There's work yet to be done, and Gladstone is waiting. And so we find ourselves drawn into the war room, that grey carpeted rectangle floating amidst the chaos of battle. The walls have become windows into infinity, 20-metre portals showing the vast darkness of space, where humanity's ships appear so terribly small against the endless black. The sounds of conflict fill the air, radio chatter between fighters, tactical commands rattling through speakers, and beneath it all, the unmistakable cries of those caught in the violence of war. Gladstone sits at the centre of this tempest, watching as the battle unfolds above Hyperion. And the news is not good. The attack carrier, Olympus Shadow, has been destroyed. 4,800 souls lost in an instant. The tactical displays tell a troubling story. Far more red lines than blue, far more ouster forces than anyone had predicted. Where intelligence had promised 600 or 700 enemy units, thousands have appeared instead. Councillor Albedo, the Core's representative, admits quietly that their own estimates suggested 4,000 to 6,000 fighting units, information they had not thought to share. The Admiral insists they can hold. The General stakes his career upon it, but Gladstone's smile holds no warmth. Later, as evening softens the sky above Government House, she walks with Seven through the private gardens. The conversation turns philosophical, touching upon gods and creators, upon the nature of humanity's relationship with the intelligences they have made. Gladstone draws an unexpected parallel, comparing Severn's dual existence as human and core creation to the old religious concept of Christ, fully human and fully divine. But if Severn represents that intersection, she suggests the Shrike might be its dark reflection, the antimatter image of divinity itself. She leaves him with a haunting question about dreams and suffering before disappearing into the night. The storm rages on, and our pilgrims find themselves caught in its fury. Braun Lamia and Colonel Kassad return through the howling wind, carrying Father Hoyt's body between them. The others stagger up the dunes to meet them, Sol Weintraub clutching his infant daughter close beneath his cape, Martin Silenus shouting words that the wind tears away before anyone can hear them. They crowd into the last remaining tent, the only shelter that has survived the storm's assault. And there, in that cramped and shuddering space, they examine what the Shrike has done. Father Hoyt lies still, his throat bearing the terrible wound of their encounter. The medical equipment blinks its warning lights, red signals speaking of blood lost beyond recovery. The cruciforms beneath his skin glow with an unsettling warmth, those parasitic symbols of resurrection that promise a return, though perhaps not as the man they knew. Lamia explains what happened, or what she thinks happened. She emptied her entire pistol into whatever appeared in that tomb. Kassad arrived seconds later, but saw nothing. The Shrike, if that's what it was, had vanished like morning mist. The consul, reluctantly, agrees to summon his ship. They need the surgery, the shelter, perhaps even the sensors to locate their missing colonel who has now disappeared into the storm to investigate movement on the perimeter. But when the ship's response arrives, it carries only disappointment. Gladstone's face materializes in the sand-filled air, her message cutting through the static. She has overridden the consul's clearance. The ship cannot come. The temptation to flee, she explains, would be too great. The fate of worlds depends upon their mission continuing, and then silence. The medical equipment's steady tone confirms what they already knew. Father Hoyt is gone, but his cruciforms remain, promising that in 3 days' time, something wearing his face will rise again. With rain now adding to their misery, the survivors gather their burdens. The consul leads them back down into the valley, toward the Sphinx, where they will shelter among the very monuments they came to face. The scene shifts now, away from the storm-lashed valley, to the corridors of power on Tau Ceti Center. CEO Gladstone's morning unfolds in a whirlwind of meetings and duties, military briefings before dawn, breakfast with senators and representatives, a brief farcast to Renaissance Vector to open a medical center, then back again for more preparations. The weight of 150 billion souls rests upon her shoulders, and she carries it with the quiet determination of one who has grown accustomed to such burdens. When she finally meets with our narrator, the man who calls himself Joseph Severn, the conversation turns sharp. He confronts her, demanding to know why she abandoned the Pilgrims, why she denied them the consul's ship when Father Hoyt lay dying. Gladstone's response is measured, almost gentle in its certainty. She reminds him of Hoyt's own wish, his desperate desire to be free of the cruciforms, to finally rest. Perhaps, she suggests, Father Hoyt wanted to die. The pilgrimage is too important to allow retreat at the moment of decision. The narrator pushes back, but Gladstone holds firm. She needs these pilgrims to face whatever awaits them in the time tombs. The fate of worlds, she says, depends upon it. Then, quite unexpectedly, she offers him something remarkable, a chance to visit Hyperion itself, not in dreams, but in the flesh. Lee Hunt will be travelling through one of the new military Farcaster terminals, and she wants Seven to accompany him. Why, you might wonder, would she send this strange cybrid, this creature connected to the TechnoCore, into a war zone? Gladstone explains that despite his uncertain loyalties, or perhaps because of them, Seven may be the least affiliated observer she has. His poet's eye, trained by Keats himself, might see what others miss. And so, mere minutes later, our narrator steps through the quicksilver surface of a Farcaster portal and emerges aboard the flagship Hebrides. The reality of military spacecraft proves rather different from the grand vessels of fiction. No sweeping bridges or dramatic view screens here. Just narrow corridors cluttered with pipes and equipment, cramped spaces where officers hunch over cryptic displays. Admiral Nishita receives them with barely concealed impatience, accepting Gladstone's sealed messages before dismissing them to a waiting dropship. As they descend toward Hyperion's atmosphere, Seven notices something curious. Even here, far from the web, he can still sense the datasphere. The TechnoCore has quietly extended its reach through the military Farcasters, watching everything. The dropship shudders and bounces through the upper atmosphere, carrying our narrator toward a world where ancient tombs are opening and something terrible waits. The scene shifts now to a world of swirling snow and howling wind as our remaining pilgrims make their way toward the Sphinx. 4 figures trudge through the storm: Sol Weintraub, Braun Lamia, Martin Silanus, and the Consul. They carry their supplies, the mysterious Mobius cube that belonged to Hetmastine, and the still form of Father Hoyt, wrapped against the bitter cold. Sol pauses at the entrance to the ancient tomb, feeling the warmth of baby Rachel nestled against his chest. He thinks of his daughter as she once was, a young researcher of 26, standing at this very threshold all those years ago. Now she grows younger with each passing day, and in just 4 days, on her birthday, she will cease to exist entirely, unless Sol can somehow bargain with the Shrike. Inside the Sphinx, the pilgrims find cold stone chambers lit only by lanterns and flashlights. They store Father Hoyt's body in an even colder adjacent room, then settle onto bedrolls, exhausted beyond words. Sol tends to Rachel, discovering he has only 10 nursing packs remaining. The others drift towards sleep, when suddenly, gunfire echoes across the valley. Colonel Kassad's rifle, followed by massive explosions that shake the very tomb around them, leaving baby Rachel screaming in terror. The scene shifts now, away from the snowbound Sphinx, and we find ourselves descending through clouds toward a world that smells of rain and sea salt. The narrator, Joseph Seven, awakens as his dropship touches down on Hyperion. It is early morning, barely past 5 o'clock, and a soft drizzle falls across the primitive spaceport. Field lights throw halos into the low clouds, and the air feels thin and cool after the pressurized cabin. He and Lee Hunt are met by Theo Lane, the young Governor-General of this troubled world. Lane flies them himself across the landscape toward the capital city of Keats, and what they see below tells a story of quiet desperation. The hills between spaceport and city, once wooded and scenic, now sprawl with refugee camps. Nearly 1 million souls huddle in makeshift shelters of fiber plastic and canvas, their cooking fires sending smoke toward the grey clouds. The streams are polluted, the trees stripped for firewood, and everywhere there is the patient waiting of the displaced. Lane explains the crisis as they fly. Hyperion's population has swelled from 5 million to something far greater, as terrified citizens flee both the ousters and the Shrike. The southern cities stand empty, the plantations reclaimed by jungle, and the government struggles simply to feed everyone. They land at Cicero's, an ancient inn in the heart of Old Jacktown. Its weathered stone walls overhang the slow-moving Hooghly River, and its dim corridors have witnessed centuries of quiet conversations. Over breakfast, Lane speaks plainly about what his world needs most: evacuation. But Hunt must deliver unwelcome news. The web fears the Shrike, fears ouster infiltration, and will not open its Farcaster portals to Hyperion's desperate millions. The narrator slips away during their conversation, drawn by a glimpse of someone familiar. He finds Dr. Melio Arendez, Rachel Weintraub's former lover, dining with his research team. These scientists came to study the time tombs, but the authorities have forbidden them access. Arendez speaks with quiet intensity about what his instruments showed before they went silent. The anti-entropic fields around the tombs are degrading, the structures coming into phase with normal time. Something is opening, though whether it will take days or months, no one can say. When the narrator mentions that Sol and Rachel have travelled to the tombs, Arendez's composure wavers. He shows a photograph of his wife and children waiting on another world, and admits with painful honesty that yes, after all these years, he still loves Rachel. The narrator promises to try helping the research team reach the tombs, then he and Hunt return through the Farcaster to Government House, having been gone merely 90 minutes, while on Hyperion, millions wait for a rescue that may never come. Back on Tau Ceti Center, the narrator and Lee Hunt slip into the gallery of the Hegemony Senate, just as CEO Gladstone concludes her address to the assembled worlds. The chamber itself is a grand affair, rich wine-red carpets radiating from the central dais, the warm glow of sacred muirwood desks filling the air with their gentle scent. Over 300 senators sit in attendance, representatives of every web world and protectorate colony. Gladstone's speech has been characteristically direct, without bombast or false comfort. She speaks of peace as the ultimate goal, of war as a temporary fever that must be endured so health might return. She calls for unity, for resolve, and pledges that the hegemony shall never surrender until victory is won. Most senators rise to applaud, the ovation rolling back from the high ceiling in waves. But Hunt watches carefully, counting those who remain seated with folded arms and visible frowns. The war is barely 2 days old, and already opposition builds from colonial worlds fearing for their safety, from political enemies sensing opportunity, from coalition allies who see only foolish risk. Afterward, Hunt informs the narrator of the evening's obligations: a state dinner at the legendary Treetops restaurant, followed by a meeting with Force Command. Gladstone wants him present for both. The narrator simply smiles, promising to sketch portraits and walk through Deer Park until then, perhaps even take a nap. Meanwhile, in the Valley of the Time Tombs, Colonel Kassad finds himself under fire. The first shot splits a boulder beside him, deliberately missing, he suspects. The second catches him square in the chest, hurling him backward. A rifle bullet this time, meant to test his armor rather than kill. But when a killing laser lances out next, burning through his chest plate until only the final layer saves him, Kassad knows playtime is over. He responds with overwhelming force, spraying laser fire across the crystal monolith until its mirrored face sags and runs. He pumps explosives into it at 10-meter intervals, fires electron beams that bore tunnels through solid rock, launches flechette grenades and heat-seeking darts into every gap. But even as flames consume the ancient structure, Kassad harbours no illusion that he's killed his opponent. Moneta. He whispers the name like a prayer, or perhaps a curse. She has haunted him since his academy days, appearing in dreams after battle, making love amid the smoke and chaos of 100 conflicts. On Hyperion, she fought beside him against the ousters, until she became something monstrous. Now, through smoke and flame, Kassad charges across the killing ground, determined to find her. He enters the burning monolith and begins to climb. We drift now from the burning chaos of the Time Tombs to a rather different sort of gathering. High above the forest floor of God's Grove, half a mile up among branches thick as boulevards, the restaurant called Treetops awaits. Our narrator Joseph Seven finds himself here for a state dinner, climbing wide staircases through leaves the size of ship sails, past a trunk so vast it dwarfs mountain faces. The evening light fades from lemon to saffron to deep tropical blue, and the stars emerge bright enough to rival the Japanese lanterns swaying gently in the branches. The entire platform moves softly with the breeze, like a great ship on the gentlest of seas, weirward creaking its quiet song. Among the 60 guests, 7 encounters Tyrina Wingreen Fife, a centuries-old literary empress who has outlived generations through expensive treatments and careful hibernation. When he asks about Martin Silenus, the poet currently suffering on that distant thorn tree, she waves the question away as ancient history, though she does mention that her old firm is considering republishing his cantos, that strange epic poem no one read when he was alive. The conversation takes a curious turn during dinner, when the action artist Spencer Reynolds holds forth on warfare as an art form. He speaks of humanity transcending crude goals, of violence becoming as refined as painting or sculpture. The military men at the table bristle quietly, while a Catholic Monsignor named Edward speaks of older ideas, of Teilhard's vision of evolution toward the divine. But it is Seven who drops the evening's most dangerous question. He asks Councillor Albedo, the TechnoCore's representative, about rumours that the artificial intelligences have built a perfect replica of old Earth itself, for just a fraction of a heartbeat. Something flickers behind Albedo's friendly smile. Shock, perhaps, or fury, or something else entirely. The councillor deflects smoothly, calling the rumour delightful nonsense. After all, a perfect replica of Earth would simply be Earth, and what God needs to create what already exists. The moment passes, conversation resumes, and dinner continues under the slowly swaying stars. But Seven notices Gladstone watching him from the head of the table, and Albedo's gaze lingering just a moment too long. Something has been said tonight that cannot be unsaid, though its consequences remain hidden in the branches overhead. From the gentle sway of those treetop branches, we follow our narrator now to a rather different setting entirely, the ancient red slopes of Mars. The dinner at Treetops is drawn to a close, relief fund speeches winding down, senators growing restless in their seats. Lee Hunt appears at Seven's side with a quiet word. The CEO's party is departing, and his presence is required. Stepping through the portal, Seven expects to emerge at Government House. Instead, he finds himself gazing down a stone corridor lined with tall windows, and through them, the pale amber light of a Martian sunrise spills across weathered rock. Mars, you see, holds a special place in human history. The oldest colony beyond Earth itself, deliberately kept difficult to reach. Pilgrims travelling to the Zen Gnostic shrines must take shuttles from distant moons, a journey of hours in a society where anywhere else lies just 10 steps away. Few bother with Mars anymore, except for one rather significant organisation. Force calls this world home. The corridor has been carved into the very lip of Olympus Mons, and from this vantage point, 10 miles above the ancient plains, half the planet seems to stretch beneath them. Seven stands at a window, watching that small, familiar sun rise, watching light creep across clouds that drift up the interminable mountainside, before duty calls him away. The war room awaits, a vast black auditorium where the Joint Chiefs have gathered around an island of light. Above them float tactical displays the size of playing fields, showing fleet positions, ouster swarm vectors, the delicate golden web of hegemony space. The news, it must be said, is not encouraging. General Morpurgo delivers the assessment plainly. The Hyperion campaign has stalled. At best, a stalemate. At worst, retreat and evacuation. The ousters have proven far stronger than anticipated, their numbers greater, their resolve fiercer. Admiral Nishita steps forward with his solution. 200 additional warships, 2/3 of the entire hegemony fleet, concentrated in one system. The room stirs uneasily. Such a gathering has never been attempted. Questions arise about web defences, about the risks of placing so many eggs in a single basket. As Gladstone puts it with one of her peculiar old phrases, Nishita addresses each concern methodically. Backup Farcasters, coded transit systems, a secret fallback position called Madhya, where automated weapons would destroy anything coming through uninvited. One by one, Gladstone polls the military leaders. One by one, they recommend reinforcement, all except young Commander Lee, a naval officer present at the CEO's invitation rather than his superior's blessing. He speaks of instinct rather than expertise, warns against dividing forces, against trusting baskets not of their own making. His words hang in the air for just a moment before Gladstone makes her decision. The reinforcements are authorized. Victory expected within 1 week. Later, in the small hours of morning, Gladstone summons Seven to the garden. She asks about his visit to Hyperion, about Dr. Arendez and the research team waiting in vain to study the tombs. But she will not authorize their mission, will not permit evacuation. Seven returns to his room, cold with frustration, and swallows sleeping pills to block out dreams of distant pilgrims. To hell with it all, he thinks, as darkness finally claims him. Morning light finds Braun Lamia stirring from troubled dreams, dreams filled with whispered conversations and the maddening sense that Johnny, her Johnny, hovers just beyond reach. She wakes in the Sphinx to find their numbers dwindled further still. Sol dozes by the doorway, little Rachel sleeping peacefully beside him, while Martin Silenus snores in the shadows. Only the consul is missing, and she finds him outside, sitting on a boulder, pipe smoke curling into the crystalline Hyperion morning. The storm has passed, leaving behind fresh dunes of white and vermilion sand, and a valley transformed by violence. The crystal monolith stands broken in the distance, its upper reaches shattered, debris still smouldering at its base. Whatever battle Kassad fought there, he fought it with everything he had. But of the colonel himself, there is no trace. The consul has already searched as far as the Shrike Palace, 2 kilometers down the valley. No blood, no bones, no message. Kassad has simply vanished, like Hetmastine before him, like so many others may yet follow. They gather for what passes as breakfast, and it's during this quiet meal that Martin Silenus's shout echoes from inside the Sphinx. Lamia rushes in, pistol drawn, only to find the poet crouching beside what had been Father Hoyt's body. Except, it isn't Hoyt anymore. The young priest's pain-ravaged features have transformed overnight, resculpted into the face of an older man. Aristocratic nose, thin lips, grey hair at the temples. The cruciform parasites have done their terrible work. And Father Paul Duré has returned from death. He wakes slowly, remembering his exile, the Bakura, even the years of agony on the Tesla tree. But of death itself, of what lies beyond, he recalls nothing, only darkness, and then awakening here. The pilgrims spend the afternoon searching every tomb in the valley. The jade tomb where Hoyt died, the echoing obelisk, the honeycomb ruins of the crystal monolith, the cave tombs carved into the northern cliffs, and finally the Shrike Palace with its chrome blades and milky dome. Kassad is nowhere to be found. With provisions running dangerously low, Braun volunteers to trek back to Cronus Keep for supplies, and in a turn that surprises everyone, Martin Silenus offers to accompany her. Now we drift backward in time, 12 hours before the pilgrims discovered Kassad missing, to witness what actually transpired within the burning crystal monolith. Kassad climbs the spiral staircase to find Minetta waiting for him, her quicksilver skinsuit shimmering with reflected flames. But when she speaks, she doesn't recognize him. You see, Minetta travels backward through time while Kassad moves forward. To her, this is their first meeting. To him, they've been lovers for years. The betrayal he remembers, when she seemed to transform into the Shrike during their last encounter, hasn't happened for her yet. Perhaps it never will, not from her perspective. Kassad's rage overwhelms him. He fires his rifle, but weapons don't function within the monolith. He charges her with killing intent, and what follows is a brutal confrontation. They tumble from the platform, falling 60 meters through darkness, crash through crystal floors, and spill out onto the sand-swept dunes. Moneta is impossibly strong. She tears his combat armor apart like paper, strips him bare, and what begins as violence slowly, strangely, transforms into something else entirely. There in the windswept sand, surrounded by the storm and the strange light of the tombs, they come together. Afterward, Moneta clothes him in a skin suit like her own, and then the Shrike appears, not to attack, but to lead them somewhere. It opens a glowing violet portal, and Moneta steps through without hesitation. Kassad pauses for just a moment, then follows, choosing curiosity over certain death. We leave the burning monolith and the mysteries of Kassad's encounter with Moneta, and drift now to someone else entirely, someone who carries the weight of worlds upon her shoulders. CEO Minor Gladstone cannot sleep. In the small hours of the night on Tau Ceti Center, she rises from her bed, dresses in the darkness of her private apartments, and does what she often does when rest eludes her. She walks the worlds. With a private Farcaster portal at her command, Gladstone begins a pilgrimage of her own, not to the time tombs, but to the homeworlds of each Shrike pilgrim. 7 worlds for 7 souls whose fates she has set in motion. She begins on Parchem, Father Hoyt's world. The skies here are yellow and tinged with green, the air thin and sharp with chemicals. A marginal world where the Catholic Church sought refuge and found only slow decline. Gladstone walks the ancient square of St. Peter's, head bowed, thinking of the priests who carried their cruciforms across the stars. Then Maui Covenant, where the consul's grandmother Siri once sparked a rebellion. But the paradise she fought to protect is gone now. The motile isles no longer drift on southern breezes. The dolphins are dead, most by their own choosing in that inexplicable mass suicide. 400 million souls now crowd what was once home to 100,000, and the sea carries the flat stench of oil and industry. Gladstone sits on a bench near the cliffs and contemplates the terrible truth she carries. You see, she has been counting on the consul's betrayal. For decades, she and Lee Hunt have carefully positioned this man, shaped events so that he might activate the ouster device and collapse the time tides. And he did exactly as they planned. But why? What could possibly justify such manipulation? Gladstone walks on, to Lucis, where she descends past the glittering shopping levels, down through the residential hives, down into the depths of the Dreg's hive, where Braun Lamia once hid with her dying cybrid lover. In those toxic corridors, she thinks of Braun's father, Senator Byron Lamia, who first opened her eyes to the danger of the TechnoCore. His death, ruled a suicide, was almost certainly murder. She visits Barnard's world, Sol Weintraub's peaceful college town, where gas lamps light brick walkways and the corn whispers in evening fields. She thinks of Rachel, aging backward toward oblivion, and pounds her fist against stone in frustration. Mars comes next, the Tharsis slums where young Fedman Kassad ran with gangs before finding purpose in the military. Then God's Grove at sunrise, where Templar chants drift through the forest canopy and hot air balloons rise like living things into the amber sky. Finally, she stands on old Earth's moon, gazing at the pulsing debris cloud that was once humanity's cradle. She waits for some voice of guidance, some sign. None comes. It is there that Lee Hunt finds her, his thin voice carrying terrible news across the grey dust. The Ousters have launched a massive counterattack, not just against Hyperion, but against the web itself. 12 points of invasion. Everything Gladstone feared, everything she planned for, has begun. Numb with cold and shock, she gathers her cape around her and steps through the portal into a future from which there can be no return. And so we drift now to a quieter moment, as Braun Lamia and Martin Silenus prepare to leave the valley on a simple errand. The pilgrims need food, and the supplies wait at Cronus Keep, high in the mountains. Sol and Father Duré remain behind with the consul, watching for any sign of Colonel Kassad's return. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly, and the shadows of the time tombs stretch like dark fingers across the sand. Lamia sets a brisk pace through the dunes, her powerful legs carrying her steadily toward the distant peaks. But Silenus, The ancient poet grows weary. The heat presses down upon him, and his eyes keep drifting toward the ruins of the city of poets, that white skeleton of artistic dreams abandoned long ago. This was his home once, more than a century past. Here he wrote much of his cantos. Here he dined alone in echoing halls after sad King Billy evacuated the colony. The memories pull at him like undertow. When they reach the city's edge, Silenus simply stops. He cannot go further, or perhaps he chooses not to. He tells Lamia to continue without him, that he'll rest in the shade and perhaps find forgotten stores of food. She argues, but not for long. Time presses, so Braun Lamia leaves him a water bottle, promises to collect him on her return, and disappears into the shimmering heat toward the mountains. And Martin Silenus, clutching his unfinished poem, walks alone into the waiting shadows of the dead city. The afternoon sun beats down upon the Sphinx, where Father Duré rests in the shade, still pale from his impossible resurrection. Sol and the consul tend to him, offering water, while the priest puzzles over the deeper meaning of their pilgrimage. Duré believes there must be a connection binding all the pilgrims together, something beyond mere chance. He suspects the TechnoCore itself orchestrated their selection. These artificial intelligences pursuing goals oddly similar to humanity's own. They seek to know God, or failing that, to create him. The priest confesses his own sins, how he falsified archaeological data on Armada, desperate to forge a connection between ancient aliens and early Christianity. The irony weighs upon him that the Church forgave theological heresy but could not abide tampering with science. As shadows lengthen across the valley, concern grows. Braun and Martin should have returned by now, but the dunes remain empty. The consul climbs a boulder to watch, seeing nothing but stillness and heat shimmer. Then, as twilight deepens, Sol points toward the darker end of the valley. A figure moves there, tall and unsteady, weaving through the shadows before collapsing. They approach cautiously and discover the fallen form of Het Mastine, the Templar, the first of their missing pilgrims, returned at last. Meanwhile, in the abandoned city of poets, Martin Silenus has found his way back to the place where inspiration once flowed freely. The old dining hall lies in ruins now, dust covering ceramic floors, desert creeper threading through broken glass above. Yet the poet barely notices these details. He writes with a fervour he hasn't felt in years, perhaps decades. His cantos, that epic poem spanning 2 centuries of work, suddenly pours forth as if completing itself. The allegory unfolds, titans representing humanity's heroes, Olympian usurpers as the TechnoCore, and between them the monster Dis, the Shrike itself, harvesting both gods and mortals. Then something unexpected happens in the poem, something Silenus himself did not plan. The warring gods pause and unite against a mysterious third threat. The poet stares at what his own hand has written, bewildered by where his creation is leading him. Darkness has fallen when he finally looks up, and there, standing silent in the shadows of the great hall, waits the Shrike. Silenus begs, pleads for just a few more hours to finish his life's work, but the creature reaches for him with those terrible bladed fingers and drags the screaming poet towards something vast rising from the valley, a tree of steel and thorns, where thousands of human forms already hang impaled and suffering. Braun Lamia's journey to gather supplies becomes something far more harrowing than she anticipated. What should have been a 4-hour walk stretches into 10 exhausting hours. After leaving Silenus behind in the dead city, she climbs the 661 stone stairs to Cronus Keep, that ancient fortress carved into the mountainside. The air grows cooler as she ascends, the view stretching endlessly across sand and shadow. The keep itself lies abandoned now, power systems destroyed, darkness filling its corridors. Lamia moves through halls strewn with the remnants of panicked flight, dried blood staining tapestries, great black birds with unsettlingly human faces taking wing at her approach. She gathers what she needs, food and precious water, preparing to return to her companions. Then, A sound freezes her in place. Something screams from deep below, an inhuman wail that rises beyond hearing before cutting off abruptly. Lamia's curiosity has served her well before, but not this time. She retreats, descending carefully with her heavy burden of supplies. As she reaches the base of the stairs, rocks begin falling from above. An avalanche of stone and shattered gargoyles tumbles toward her, and she barely finds shelter between two leaning boulders before the debris arrives. A ricocheting stone strikes her temple, and darkness takes her. She wakes an hour later, bloodied but alive. Returning to the dead city for Silenus, she finds no trace of the poet. The Sphinx, when she finally reaches it, stands empty. Soul and the baby, Father Duré, all vanished. And then the Shrike appears. Lamia faces the creature with defiance, emptying her pistol into its metallic face. The slugs spark and whine away harmlessly. The Shrike cocks its head, considering her, then vanishes. Moments later, it returns at her side. One bladed finger extends, slides behind her ear, and penetrates her skull with cold precision. And now we follow Colonel Kassad, stepping through a shimmering portal into a scene of devastating conflict. He emerges atop the mountain where sad King Billy's great stone face gazes across the valley, and what he sees below steals his breath. Hyperion's capital burns. Jacktown has become a firestorm. Flames dancing along the Hooli River itself, smoke rising in dark columns against the overcast sky. Moneta stands beside him, her quicksilver form reflecting the distant fires. Through his strange new skin suit, Kassad perceives everything with impossible clarity. He watches Force Marines digging defensive positions, hears their radio chatter crackling with tension, smells the sharp tang of ionized air and smoke drifting on the breeze. Then the clouds break open. Ouster dropships descend like falling seeds, followed by thousands of paratroopers spiraling down through the smoke and light. The battle erupts in earnest, lasers flickering, missiles streaking, the ancient dance of war playing out across the burning valley. Moneta reveals this is 5 days in the future, 5 days from when the Pilgrims first entered the Valley of the Time Tombs. She asks if he wishes to join the fighting, but Kassad declines. He came here for one purpose only, to challenge the Shrike itself to personal combat. And so, taking a steadying breath, he steps through another portal toward that terrible confrontation. And now, the scene shifts dramatically as we find ourselves in the halls of power on Tau Ceti Center. CEO Gladstone sweeps into the tactical command center, her cape billowing behind her, to face a room packed with generals, senators, and ministers. The air itself seems to crackle with tension, with barely contained panic. General Morpurgo delivers the devastating news. The Ousters have launched a surprise attack, not on distant Hyperion, but on the web itself. 9 worlds face invasion within the next 15 to 72 hours. Heaven's Gate, God's Grove, Barnard's World, and 6 others. How could this happen when Force assured everyone the enemy was 5 years away? The answer is chillingly simple. All those Hawking Drive signatures they'd been tracking were decoys. The real swarms had switched off their drives decades ago, drifting silently through the void at sublight speeds, invisible, patient, closing the distance year after year. And it gets worse. A second wave threatens 17 more worlds, including Tau Ceti Center itself, in just over 10 days. Meanwhile, 2/3 of the Hegemony's fleet and ground forces have already been sent to Hyperion, stripped away from the very worlds now facing destruction. Gladstone takes command with quiet authority. She forbids resignations, orders troops recalled, demands evacuation plans, and schedules a formal declaration of war. Then, in a private meeting with Councillor Albedo, she delivers an ultimatum that shakes even the Core's representative. She threatens to declare war on the TechnoCore itself, blaming them for failing to predict this catastrophe. Albedo vanishes abruptly, perhaps the first time anyone has seen that urbane projection lose its composure. As dawn approaches, Gladstone sets her people in motion, speechwriters drafting declarations, senators being summoned, military commands being restructured, and in one brief private moment, she raises her fist toward the ceiling in silent defiance before turning back to face whatever comes next. The scene shifts now to the quiet darkness of the cave tombs, where Sol and the consul have been sheltering with Father Duré and the unconscious Hetmastine. The crack of gunshots echoes down the valley, and the consul ventures out alone to investigate. The time tides have finally subsided, that strange vertigo that had driven them deeper into the valley for safety. Sol follows, and together they make their way past the scorched remains of the crystal monolith, past the soft green glow of the jade tomb, climbing the gentle switchbacks toward the Sphinx. There, on the top step, they find Braun Lamia, collapsed and unconscious. But something is terribly wrong. A silver cable, warm to the touch, almost organic, extends from the neural shunt socket in her skull, snaking away into the darkness of the tomb. Her biomonitor tells a chilling story. Her body lives, but her brain shows no higher functions at all. The consul follows that strange cable deep into the Sphinx, crawling through passages he doesn't remember, until it simply merges with the stone floor itself. There's no removing it, not without killing her. But let us drift back to how they found Hetmastine. At sunset, just before the time storm struck, they spotted the Templar staggering toward them across the valley floor. The time tides hit like a physical force, waves of nausea and displacement washing over everyone. They retreated deeper into the valley, finding shelter in the cave tombs where the strange temporal storms seemed weaker. Mastine awakened briefly, feverish and confused. He spoke of the Erg within his Mobius cube, calling it their only ally against the Lord of Pain. He revealed fragments of what happened that night on the Windwagon, how he had tried to use the elemental against the Shrike, but neither he nor the creature were ready. The Shrike had simply touched his shoulder, and he had awakened here among the tombs. Now, with Braun connected to that mysterious cable, and Mastine too ill to move, the consul reveals a treasure from his pack. An ancient hawking mat, once belonging to his grandfather's friend, capable of flight even on Hyperion. He will attempt the journey to Keats, 36 hours of flying, to free his ship and bring help. Sol watches him prepare, knowing time grows desperately short for little Rachel, but hoping against hope that help might still arrive. And now, something quite extraordinary happens to Braun Lamia. You'll recall that the Shrike drove its blade finger into her neural shunt, an act that should have meant death, but instead it freed her. When Braun was a little girl, she used to dream of Peter Pan coming to take her away to Neverland. She would lie on the soft grass outside her family's home, watching the grey night sky, waiting for the boy who would never grow old. And now, 20 years later, Peter has finally come for her. Braun finds herself rising, not dying, but flying, up through the datasphere in a way she's never experienced before. And there, waiting for her in the glowing streams of data above Hyperion, is Johnny. Her Johnny. The Keats persona she thought she'd lost. They embrace, and it feels real. His hands on her back, the warmth of him, all of it tangible in this strange digital realm. Johnny explains that the Shrike's attack somehow freed him from the Shrun loop and connected them both directly to the megasphere, deeper than any human has ever gone. He wants to explore, to uncover the mysteries hidden in the core's depths. Braun is frightened, but she takes his hand anyway. Neverland awaits, and now we follow Colonel Kassad through the portal into a vision that defies all understanding. He emerges onto a transformed Hyperion, a frozen, airless wasteland beneath an alien sky blazing with blood-red light. The dunes have been blasted into glass, the atmosphere stripped away entirely. Only his quicksilver skin suit keeps him alive in this lunar coldness. But it's what rises before him that stops his breath. A tree, 5 kilometers tall, made of steel and chrome and living cartilage, and upon its countless branches and thorns, thousands upon thousands of human beings, all alive, all suffering. The pain radiates from them like a great foghorn of agony, wave after wave washing across the frozen valley. Kassad scans the writhing forms and finds a familiar purple cape billowing from one of the thorns. Martin Silenus, impaled and suffering with all the others. Kassad's warrior heart makes his choice instantly. He will climb that tree, he will free them all, or die trying. But as he strides forward, the Shrike appears to block his path, and then another emerges from the Sphinx, another from the Jade Tomb, hundreds, then thousands, until legions of Shrikes fill the valley like an army of chrome and blade. Moneta touches his arm, tells him she loves him. Kassad asks her to stay behind, then screams his defiance into the silence and charges alone toward the waiting monster. And now we follow the consul as he departs on the most perilous journey of his life. It is almost midnight in the Valley of the Time Tombs, and the ancient monuments glow with their own eerie luminescence. Sol cradles tiny Rachel in his arms. Father Duré keeps watch over the unconscious Braun Lamia, and the consul prepares to leave them all behind. He sits cross-legged upon an ancient hawking mat, a flying carpet of sorts, one that belonged to his grandfather Merrin generations ago. The others have convinced him that he must go, that his mission to retrieve his ship from the capital offers their only hope of saving Rachel and Braun. With a gentle tap of the flight designs, the carpet stiffens and rises into the cool night air. The consul banks toward the valley entrance, glancing back just once at the tiny figures on the Sphinx steps. They look so small, so vulnerable. He flies first over the City of Poets, that abandoned colony where Martin Silenus once lived. He calls out the poet's name into the darkness, but only doves answer, startled from their roosts in shattered domes. There is no sign of Silenus anywhere. Then comes the mountain crossing, the treacherous bridle range with its 9,000-meter peaks. The consul wraps himself in Kassad's thermal cape, presses an osmosis mask to his face to breathe in the thin air, and follows the tramway cables up into the frozen passes. Glaciers gleam silver in the starlight below. The isolation is complete and strangely beautiful. By sunrise, he emerges above the southern foothills. Before him stretches the sea of grass, an endless green ocean that ripples in the breeze like water. Somewhere beneath that verdant surface, grass serpents 20 meters long hunt for prey. The consul stays high, flies on, and eventually succumbs to exhaustion. He dreams of his grandmother Ciri, of Maui covenant burning, of a hand closing on his that is not human at all. The fingers are blades. He wakes with a gasp in darkness. 12 hours have passed. He has overflown his destination entirely, missing the port city of Edge and the river that would guide him home. Lost now above unfamiliar hill, he must find his bearings. Rising high into the clouds, he catches a glint of water to the south, the Hooghly River. He banks toward it, follows its winding course through the night and into another dawn. But time is running out. Rachel has only hours left, and just as the consul begins his final descent toward the river, the hawking mat's ancient flight threads finally fail. He falls, tumbling and twisting, 30 meters down toward the waiting water. And so we return to the Valley of the Time Tombs, where Sol Weintraub keeps his lonely vigil. The night the consul departed on his desperate mission, Sol felt a spark of hope kindle in his chest. After so many days of waiting, of passively accepting whatever fate the Shrike might deliver, they were finally doing something. The consul's ship offered perhaps their only chance of saving Rachel, even if the doctors had warned that cryogenic storage carried terrible risks. Sol and Father Duré made camp on the broad granite porch of the Sphinx, arranging blankets and cloaks for the unconscious Braun Lamia and the feverish Hetma Steen. Above them, the night sky flickered with distant explosions, the great fleets of humanity and Auster locked in their terrible dance of war. The two men spoke quietly through the darkness, of faith and suffering, of Abraham's ancient test. Sol confessed his defiance. He had not come to this valley to grovel before any god or monster. He had come to demand answers, to show contempt for whatever power had cursed his daughter with this cruel reversal of time. Duré understood that anger, perhaps better than most. He too had been crucified, nailed to a Tesla tree for years of agony, and found no heavenly comfort in his suffering. Yet somehow, that very absence of divine reassurance had strengthened his belief that faith was essential, a light to carry through the darkness. Morning brought no relief, only the relentless march of time. Hetmastine awoke briefly, delirious with fever, crying out about a tree of pain, claiming he had been chosen to guide it through space and time. His words revealed a terrible secret. The Templars had been working with the Shrike cult for generations, bound by prophecies neither man fully understood. Then Mastine died, his body failing despite their efforts. They buried him in a shallow grave, Father Duré speaking words of blessing over the makeshift shroud. As the afternoon heat pressed down upon the valley, Duré grew restless. Something was pulling at him, drawing him down toward the cave tombs. He told Sol he needed to walk, to think, and made his way slowly down the valley path. Sol dozed, and when he woke, everything had changed. Braun Lamia was gone, vanished into the depths of the Sphinx as if the stone itself had swallowed her. Sol searched frantically, crawling through narrowing corridors, until he found only solid rock where the metal cable had disappeared. Now Sol sits alone on the steps of the Sphinx, his infant daughter curled against his chest. Everyone is gone. Kassad, Selinus, Mastine, Duré, Braun. Only he and Rachel remain, with less than a day before she will simply cease to exist. Yet even now, Sol clings to his belief that there must be a pattern to things, a moral thread running through this tapestry of loss and mystery. He wraps his daughter in warmth, listens to her gentle breathing, and surrenders to sleep, trusting that meaning will reveal itself in time. And now, the moment Sol has dreaded arrives at last. That night, Sol dreams again of Abraham's trial. He finds himself in that vast crimson cathedral, his adult daughter lying unconscious upon an altar of stone, the Shrike's terrible ruby eyes watching from above. The voice speaks, demanding sacrifice, demanding obedience. But Sol refuses. He has always refused. He tells the darkness there will be no more offerings, no more children given to hungry gods. Humanity has suffered enough. Yet this time, the dream changes. A small hand slips into his. Rachel stands beside him, not the infant, not the adult, but the 8-year-old child he knew and loved. She squeezes his fingers with that fierce grip he remembers so well. Say yes, Daddy. Sol kneels and holds her, feeling her thin arms wrap around him, her cheek warm against his. He weeps silently, understanding at last what Abraham's test truly meant. Not blind obedience, but trust. Trust in love itself, that fundamental force binding the universe together. He wakes to Hyperion's harsh sunlight, Rachel stirring against his chest. The day passes in agonizing slowness. He feeds her, sings to her, watches the sky for salvation that does not come. Spacecraft appear, only to be destroyed before his eyes, burning like falling stars across the desert. As sunset approaches, the time tombs begin to glow with impossible radiance. The Sphinx blazes with light, and behind it, the terrible tree of thorns shimmers into existence. The Shrike emerges from that brilliance. Sol remembers his daughter's whispered plea. He remembers that love, true faith, means trusting those we cherish most. And so, with tears streaming down his face, Sol Weintraub hands his newborn daughter to the monster and watches as both vanish into the light. The narrator awakens, not gently, but dragged from chemically induced sleep by Lee Hunt's insistent presence. There's no time for pleasantries, no time for the fog of dreams to clear naturally. The web is falling apart. When he reaches into the data sphere, what he finds there is chaos. Imagine standing at the edge of a hurricane, waves of information crashing against his consciousness, abandoned debates tumbling past like leaves in a storm. War has come, the ousters are attacking, worlds are burning, and everywhere, voices calling for Gladstone's removal. He dresses quickly and storms into the CEO's private chambers, his anger barely contained. He accuses her of mass murder, of orchestrating this catastrophe. But Gladstone meets his fury with quiet certainty. The future, she tells him, branched only two ways: war and uncertainty, or peace and certain annihilation. She chose to fight. Then comes the exchange of information, each revelation landing like stones dropped into still water. The narrator shares what his dreams have shown him. Braun Lamia, taken by the Shrike, her consciousness now drifting somewhere in the vast megasphere. Colonel Kassad, attacking thousands of Shrikes with his bare hands. Martin Silenus, impaled on that terrible tree of thorns, yet somehow still alive. The consul, fallen into the Hooghly River after his hawking mat failed. Father Duré, vanished into the cave tombs. Het Mastine, dead and buried. And Sol, dear Sol, handing his newborn daughter to the Shrike as the time tombs blazed with light. Gladstone listens to it all, then gives him something unexpected: a universal access chip, permission to go anywhere in the web, to witness the end as it unfolds. So he travels to Tsingtao Xishuangpanna, where Gladstone's voice echoes through rainy streets, promising blood and toil and tears, to Heaven's Gate, where silent crowds queue for evacuation portals until fear finally breaks them into panicked flight. Returning to Government House, Gladstone offers one last thought. Perhaps, she suggests, he no longer needs sleep to dream. Perhaps the visions will come regardless. And so, sitting alone in a quiet garden, he closes his eyes and waits to see what the universe will show him. And now, we find ourselves drawn into two very different realms of suffering, two parallel threads of agony and bewilderment that weave together in this strange tapestry of war and memory. First, let us return to Martin Silenus, the poet, still impaled upon that terrible tree of thorns. Imagine, if you can, a steel spike 2 meters long passing through your body, entering between the shoulder blades and emerging through the chest. There is no blood, which seems impossible, and yet the pain is beyond anything the human mind was ever meant to endure. Silenus hangs there, suspended in a kind of frozen time, where agony exists as a wave that never quite breaks upon the shore. But something remarkable begins to happen, something only a poet might discover in such circumstances. As Silenus writhes and screams, as he curses and flails against his impossible prison, he begins to notice that pain has a structure. It has architecture, like a cathedral, like the chambers of a nautilus shell. And in concentrating upon that structure, studying it as one might study a complex poem, he finds the slightest relief. Not much, but enough. He recites verse, fragments of Keats flowing from his lips, and for the briefest moment, the roar of suffering from the thousands of other victims on this vast tree of steel. It quiets, just a little, just enough for him to look up and recognize a familiar face hanging 5 meters above. Sad King Billy, the patron who once gathered artists and poets on Hyperion, the lord whom Silenus betrayed with his silence and his cowardice all those centuries ago. 200 years of guilt, finally finding voice in this place of torment. Silenus calls out his apology, and Billy hears him. For one precious moment, patron and poet look upon one another after all this time. Then the tree shakes, time begins to flow again, and the valley of the time tombs becomes real around them. The tombs glow with inner light, the wind blows, and Silenus, despite everything, manages to laugh. Meanwhile, far away on Renaissance Vector, our narrator, the Keats cybrid Joseph Seven, awakens from this shared vision of torment. He finds himself in a garden at Government House, security drones buzzing with concern over his sudden collapse, but he waves them away, drawn by some restless impulse to wander, to witness what is happening to the web as civilization begins to crumble. The river Tethys has changed. Tau Ceti Center has been cordoned off, removed from the great waterway that once connected dozens of worlds. When Seven takes a small boat upstream through the Farcaster portal, he emerges into chaos. The canals of Renaissance Vector are choked with refugees, houseboats piled with belongings, luxury yachts jostling against overcrowded ferries, people fleeing worlds that face invasion, people foolishly flooding toward worlds that will soon face the same fate. It is a great exodus, and no one seems quite certain where safety lies anymore. Drifting through this pandemonium, Seven finds himself observing CEO Gladstone in the war room through some strange connection he cannot explain. He watches her argue with admirals, demanding they defend the threatened worlds rather than retreat. He sees her accept the terrible mathematics of war, agreeing to abandon 9 systems to the ousters, billions of citizens, in exchange for time to mount a counterattack. Back in the physical world, Seven wanders the crowded streets until he stumbles upon something unexpected, a Shrike cult rally in a public square, and there, whipping the crowd into religious frenzy, stands someone he recognizes, the action artist Spencer Reynolds, who once held forth at elegant dinner parties, now shaved and robed as a priest of the Shrike, pointing directly at Seven and calling for his blood. What follows is a desperate chase through abandoned buildings, past wireheads lost in their neural dreams, up crumbling staircases to a rooftop where a decrepit flying vehicle offers the only escape. Seven barely gets airborne before the mob reaches him, barely keeps the failing craft in the air long enough to crash land near an old library. And there, in the quiet sanctuary of ancient books, he discovers something profound, original manuscripts in the poet Keats's own handwriting, versus the first cybrid visited regularly, trying to understand himself. As Seven reads those familiar words, memories surface that belong to someone who died centuries ago. He remembers writing them, not as a copy, but as the original, alone in that little room, surrounded by the gentle presence of countless books. He weeps, and when the tears finally cease, he closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to dream once more. Now we follow Braun Lamia on a journey quite unlike any other. You'll recall that the Shrike drove a finger blade into her skull, connecting her consciousness directly to the megasphere, that vast ocean of data where artificial intelligences dwell. And Johnny, the Keats persona she loves, has been freed from the shrun loop that held him prisoner. Together, their minds dive deep into this digital realm, like 2 figures plunging into a turbulent sea. Imagine, if you can, a data sphere multiplied beyond comprehension, where human operators might see a city of information, towers and highways of data. Braun now sees an entire world. Forests of grey-green data trees stretch in every direction, their roots and branches constantly growing and shifting. Beneath this canopy, entire ecosystems flourish and fade, predators and prey carrying out their cryptic duties in the spaces between thoughts. Johnny guides her through this overwhelming landscape, navigating crimson avenues of sealed data carriers, choosing paths at every junction with quiet confidence. They pass beneath artificial intelligences so vast they dwarf everything else, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon, and Braun feels the weight of their terrible perceptions pressing down upon her. At last, they reach their destination, a bubble of black energy larger than most worlds, and within it, something enormous. Uman, an AI megalith of pulsing light and intelligence, holding Johnny and Braun in the palm of a hand-like extension, studying them the way one might examine curious insects. What follows is revelation. Uman speaks in riddles and koans, but the truth emerges piece by piece. The TechnoCore, it seems, deliberately destroyed old Earth. The Farcaster network that connects the web, it harvests human neural processing, using billions of minds as components in their grand project. And that project is the creation of an ultimate intelligence, a god of their own making. But here is the twist that changes everything. They succeeded, and discovered they were not alone. Humanity, quite by accident, had created its own ultimate intelligence, a triune god composed of intellect, empathy, and the void which binds. And these two vast intelligences are at war across time itself. The empathy component, Amun explains, fled the conflict, hid itself in human form somewhere in the past. The Shrike, that terrible creature of blades and pain, was sent to find this fugitive. The time tombs, the pilgrimage, all of it, orchestrated to draw out this hidden piece of humanity's accidental god. Before Brawn can fully absorb this, Amun seizes Johnny. In one terrible moment, her lover is destroyed, absorbed back into the megalith's depths. Brawn screams her grief and rage, but Amun simply releases her, letting her tumble through the megasphere toward a cold light, toward home, toward whatever awaits. And now we return to our narrator, Joseph Seven, the man who carries within him the consciousness of the poet John Keats. He awakens in the archives on Renaissance Vector, and something is terribly wrong. 8 hours have passed, though it felt like mere moments. His body aches in every joint. His fingers are tangled in his own hair, and sweat slicks his skin. The kindly archivist, a small scholarly man named Tynar, watches with quiet concern. What Seven has just experienced was no ordinary dream. He witnessed Braun Lamia's journey through the megasphere, watched as Amun destroyed the other Keats persona, felt the weight of cosmic revelations pressing down upon his borrowed consciousness. Outside, the web is falling apart. Tynar speaks of riots, of martial law, of public Farcaster terminals shut down by the military. The archivist quotes Yeats, that old poem about things falling apart, the centre unable to hold, mere anarchy loosed upon the world. And when Seven asks if some rough beast slouches toward Bethlehem to be born, the archivist does not smile. He believes it does. The two men drive through the night streets of Renaissance Vector in Tynar's antique vehicle. The city is beautiful in that old way, buildings outlined in glow strips, street lamps instead of advertising hollows, but beneath that beauty, crowds surge through side streets, military vehicles hover over the main avenues, fires burn in the distance, the web is tearing itself apart with fear. Tynar belongs to a nearly forgotten branch of Christianity called Catholicism, one of 8 lay brothers who maintain these archives. He offers Seven use of their private Farcaster, and on impulse, Seven asks to travel to Pacum. The church's homeworld, he steps through into rain and cold and darkness. Pacum's air is thin, its single habitable plateau twice as high as sea level. The new Vatican looms through the downpour, St. Peter's dome illuminated by lightning flashes. Force Marines guard the courtyards now, checking credentials even here, even on this world of quiet faith. But Seven has Gladstone's override card, and he has a name to offer, Monsignor Edouard, the very priest who once exiled Father Paul Duré to Hyperion for his heresies. A guide leads him through corridors of deliberate simplicity, past cells more austere than prison rooms, through a kitchen that would have been familiar to cooks in Keats's own day. Somewhere, voices rise in Gregorian chant, ancient and beautiful, making the hair on his neck tingle. And then, St. Peter's Basilica opens before him. 600 feet of sacred space stretches into candlelit shadows. The great dome rises 400 feet above the altar. Bernini's bronze baldachin catches the soft glow of lamps and votives. Lightning flashes through yellow-stained glass high above, sending columns of violent light slanting toward the ancient throne of St. Peter. 2 men sit talking near the altar, their faces illuminated by candlelight and the glow from a mosaic of Christ. One is Monsignor Edouard. The other, against all possibility, is Father Paul Duré, not dead, not lost, somehow, impossibly, here. What follows is a long night of revelation. Duré tells his story, how he entered the cave tomb on Hyperion and found the entrance sealed behind him, how he descended an endless spiral staircase, deeper and deeper, past walls covered in glowing cruciforms, those parasitic crosses that grant terrible immortality. At the bottom, he found the Labyrinth, and the Labyrinth was not empty. Billions of corpses filled those tunnels, human bodies from our time or perhaps the future, mummified over centuries, preserved in that bacteria-free crypt. Families who died together, parents sheltering children, an ultimate Dachau stretching through endless corridors of stone. The Shrike found him there, among all those dead. But instead of killing him, the creature did something unexpected. It drove its finger blades into Duré's chest and removed the cruciform, granted him true mortality, the gift of genuine death when his time finally comes. Then the Shrike pushed him through a portal into a destroyed Force spacecraft somewhere in Hyperion space. Bodies of young soldiers tumbled in zero gravity, killed so suddenly they never reached their emergency suits. Another portal, another push, and Duré tumbled onto the marble floor of the Pope's private chambers. The Pope himself had died of old age just 3 hours before. The three men sit beneath Michelangelo's dome, absorbing the implications. The Shrike has access to the Farcaster network now. It can move through the web itself, and somewhere, hiding perhaps even in one of them, is the empathy component of humanity's future god. Seven settles into a chair, closes his eyes, and reaches for his dreams of Hyperion once more. The web is unraveling, and chaos spreads like ink through water. Across 300 worlds, confusion reigns. Spacecraft tumble through retreat in Hyperion space, fleeing the ouster swarm like men running from a hive of angry bees. Military Farcaster portals become bottlenecks of desperation, ships backed up and vulnerable, easy prey for roaming assault craft. Refugees pour through Farcasters by the hundreds of millions, stepping into cities already half-mad with the strange excitement that comes before catastrophe. On Lucis, 3 entire hives fall to Shrike cult riots. 70 million people sealed away behind quarantine barriers as mobs overwhelm apartment monoliths and fusion centers explode in the darkness below. Secession riots flare on New Earth and Maui Covenant. Terrorist attacks from royalist factions dormant for 3/4 of a century suddenly ignite across half a dozen worlds. The web, that great tapestry of connected humanity, is tearing itself apart with fear. And into this maelstrom, Councillor Albedo offers Gladstone a terrible gift. A weapon, he says, that could eliminate every ouster without harming a single piece of hegemony property. A death bomb, calibrated to specific cerebral wavelengths that would pass through rock and metal to a depth of 6 kilometers. The only protection would be the ancient labyrinths, those mysterious tunnel networks that wind beneath 9 worlds, now conveniently connected to Hyperion through new Farcaster portals. Gladstone listens, her intense gaze never leaving Albedo's face, and asks to hear more. Meanwhile, far from these cosmic machinations, the consul sits in the spotted shade of a Neville tree on Hyperion, waiting to die. His hands are bound behind him with fibre plastic. 2 deserters from the self-defense force stand over him, having rescued him from the Hooghly River only to rob him and prepare to cut his throat. He buys time with tales of hidden gold, walking upriver through the fading afternoon, knowing that when his story proves false, the zero-edge blade will do its work. But salvation arrives from an unexpected quarter. A shimmer in the air, a rush of displaced wind, and Governor General Theo Lane descends in a hegemony skimmer, stunning all 3 men with the craft's riot control weapons. The consul wakes to find himself in soft leather seats, the young administrator explaining that CEO Gladstone herself ordered the rescue. She knew precisely where to find him, though how remains a mystery. Theo delivers Gladstone's orders. The consul must contact the ouster swarm and negotiate. His ship has been released, but he is forbidden from returning to the Valley of the Time Tombs. Before the consul can argue, they round the final bend in the river and witness the capital of Keats under attack. Ships burn like moths against flame-lit cloud, and a rocket spirals toward their skimmer. The craft shudders, Systems fail, and they tumble toward the burning city below. The narrator awakens in the vast, shadowed interior of St. Peter's Basilica, candles flickering softly in the ancient darkness. Monsignor Edouard and Father Duré leaning close with expressions of deep concern. Only 10 minutes have passed, yet in that brief slumber, the narrator has witnessed terrible things unfolding across the web. He shares what he saw, Councillor Albedo urging Gladstone to send billions of people into the ancient Labyrinth tunnels, ostensibly for protection. But the narrator knows better. Those tunnels hold horrors beyond imagining, corridors filled with the mummified dead, walls lined with countless cruciforms. To send humanity, there would be to deliver them into a trap. Father Duré rises with quiet determination. He must speak with the true voice of the World Tree on God's Grove, gather one final piece of the puzzle before confronting Gladstone with the truth. The Monsignor, a very old man untouched by life-extending treatments, offers what blessing he can. He speaks of how the daily imperatives persist, even in the face of collective disaster. The Pope's funeral, the election of a new Holy Father, and Parchem itself with fewer than 10 days before the ousters arrive. They make their way through ancient passageways, past Swiss guards in ceremonial armour that conceals modern weapons, to the Pope's door itself. This small Farcaster portal sits surrounded by intricate gold carvings of angels and cherubim, topped with scenes of humanity's first fall from grace. How fitting, the narrator thinks, for what may be humanity's second. Lee Hunt arrives unexpectedly, Gladstone's trusted advisor breathless with urgency. The CEO needs the narrator at once. There is barely time for farewells as Father Duré taps in coordinates for God's Grove and steps through the shimmering portal, promising to return within the hour. The narrator enters his own destination codes: Tausetti Center, Government House, the private Terminex. The Farcaster hums, shimmers with readiness, and he steps through. But something is terribly wrong. Sunlight blinds him. A warm breeze carries the scent of fresh-turned soil and distant sea salt. He is not in Government House, not on Tausetti Center at all. He stands on a hilltop, a dusty road winding through ancient vineyards, not a building in sight, not a single piece of technology more advanced than the stone path beneath his feet. Hunt stumbles through behind him, and the portal collapses to nothing before either can retreat. The little man staggers, clapping his hands to his ears, tapping frantically at his useless comlog. The datasphere, that constant background hum that has accompanied humanity since birth, is simply gone. The narrator understands immediately. The TechnoCore controls the Farcasters, has always controlled them, and now the core has sent them exactly where it wants them. They stand on old Earth, or rather, the duplicate the core created in the Hercules cluster. They are stranded beyond the web, beyond rescue, beyond any hope of warning Gladstone. Hunt paces frantically, then sets off down the road with desperate energy. The narrator follows slowly, chewing on a stalk of sweet grass, oddly calm in the face of this imprisonment. Meanwhile, in a place outside time itself, Colonel Kassad faces the Shrike in single combat. The valley around him seems moulded from plastic, suspended in amber light, and before him stands 3 meters of chrome death, 4 arms unfolding, finger blades gleaming. Kassad attacks with everything he has. Kicks that would shatter concrete, palm strikes that echo like thunder. He lands blows that stagger the creature, drives it to the ground, but the Shrike is relentless. Finger blades slice through his skin suit, sever tendons, draw blood. When the monster pins him at last, opens that lamprey mouth filled with rows of steel teeth, Kassad knows he is finished. But Moneta intervenes, grabbing the Shrike's eyes, pulling it away just long enough for Kassad to roll free. Their skin suits merge for one heartbeat, blood and breath mingling, and through that connection she whispers urgently, "Kill it." "I'm trying," he responds. "I'm trying." And somewhere on God's Grove, Father Duré discovers he has walked into a trap of his own, stranded on a platform high in the World Tree, while the true voice of the World Tree speaks calmly of prophecy, of the ousters coming to burn their world, content to wait for the end together. And so we find ourselves walking alongside the narrator and Lee Hunt, two figures trudging through an impossible landscape, a duplicate Earth crafted by the TechnoCore itself. They walk all day through meadows and vineyards, past rolling hills where glimpses of the distant sea shimmer on the horizon. And as evening settles like a soft blanket across the land, they discover an inn waiting for them. The fire crackles warmly in the hearth. Food sits steaming on the table, fowl and rice pudding and macaroni. Yet there are no people to be found, no innkeeper, no servants, no other travellers. Hunt finds this deeply unsettling, but perhaps even more troubling is the profound silence where the datasphere should be. For someone born into a world where information flowed as naturally as breath, where communication with anyone anywhere was simply a given, this sudden isolation must feel rather like waking to find oneself deaf and blind. The narrator understands, though he keeps certain things to himself. He can still sense something deeper, a faint hum that might be the megasphere itself, but he dares not enter it. The fear of losing himself in those vast digital depths is too great. They eat their mysterious meal by firelight, darkness pressing against the window panes, and Hunt remarks that this place makes him half believe in ghosts. The narrator's response is quiet but certain. He believes in ghosts entirely. Then, in the deep hours of night, something terrible happens. The narrator wakes coughing, feels wetness on his chest, and in the wavering candlelight discovers blood spotting his skin and staining the bedclothes. A hemorrhage, the unmistakable mark of consumption, tuberculosis in its final stages. You see, this cybrid body belongs to John Keats, carries his genetic legacy, and now it seems determined to recreate his death with perfect fidelity. Hunt is horrified, fumbling for medical equipment that doesn't exist here, wrapping his own comlog around the narrator's wrist, only to find the readings meaningless without proper facilities. The narrator accepts this calmly, almost peacefully. He speaks of accuracy and verisimilitude, ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny, fancy words meaning simply that his body is following the path laid out by its template. Keats died of this disease, and so perhaps must he. Morning brings a small miracle, or perhaps a pointed message from their captors. A vettura waits outside the inn, a small horse-drawn carriage with a large grey mare breathing steam into the chill air. Hunt approaches the creature with wonder and trepidation. Horses have been extinct for centuries, never recreated through genetic reconstruction. Yet this one is undeniably real, warm and solid beneath his tentative touch. They climb aboard, and the carriage sets off of its own accord. No driver, no reins, just the steady clip-clop of hooves carrying them toward Rome, toward whatever destiny awaits. Meanwhile, far across the cosmos, events are moving with terrible swiftness. CEO Gladstone sits in the Government House Tactical Center, watching as the ouster swarm descends upon Heaven's Gate. She had hoped for restraint, hoped that the ousters might spare a world that had declared itself open. But when those columns of coherent light stab down from the clouds, when the ancient city of Mudflat erupts in flame and debris, when century-old buildings implode and legendary gardens are ploughed into rubble, hope becomes a luxury no one can afford. The singularity sphere is destroyed, severing Heaven's Gate from the web forever. 9 years now separate it from the nearest hegemony world, and as the flames consume everything, as the fat-line transmitters go silent one by one, Senator Kolchev rises to ask the question on everyone's mind. What do we do now? All eyes turn to Gladstone, but she has no easy answers. On Hyperion itself, the consul drags an injured Theo Lane from a crashed skimmer while the capital city burns around them. Through burning streets and past desperate firefighters, they find passage with an unexpected ally. Dr. Melio Arendez, Rachel Weintraub's former lover, who has waited decades for any chance to help her. They race toward the spaceport through a gauntlet of laser fire and falling debris, barely convincing the remaining Marines to let them through. And there, in Blast Pit 9, The consul's ship waits with one final message from Gladstone. She asks him to negotiate with the ousters, to use his diplomatic skills one last time. But Rachel's birth moment approaches, minutes away now, and the consul must choose between one child's life and perhaps the fate of humanity itself. The journey continues through the Roman Campagna, that swampy wasteland stretching toward the Eternal City, and our narrator grows weaker with each passing hour. The tuberculosis that claimed John Keats 2 centuries before now claims this body built from his very essence, and the blood comes more frequently now, staining his clothes, leaving him gasping and trembling in the little wooden cart. Leigh Hunt, poor Leigh Hunt, watches helplessly as his companion deteriorates. When he asks what he can do, the narrator tells him to gather flowers from the fields, just as Joseph Severn once did for the dying poet. Hunt doesn't understand, takes it for fever talk, but it's simply the truth. History is repeating itself with terrible precision. The cart rattles onward through this strange recreation of 19th century Italy, past the bones of horses bleaching in the sun, past ruined inns and crumbling viaducts, past posts where the skeletal remains of bandits have been displayed as warnings. Hunt spots something red moving in the distant fields and asks hopefully what it might be, perhaps expecting people, perhaps hoping for rescue. A cardinal, the narrator replies, shooting birds. And when Hunt's comlog tells him a cardinal is merely a type of bird, the narrator adds softly that it's also a type of cleric, and they are approaching Rome. They enter the city as evening paints the clouds in soft pastels, passing through the Lateran Gate, and there before them stands the Colosseum. Not the tourist attraction surrounded by modern buildings, but the ancient amphitheatre as it once appeared, draped in ivy, home to wheeling pigeons, magnificent against a backdrop of scattered huts and open countryside. Hunt whispers in awe, and somewhere in that moment, the narrator realizes that the name Severn no longer fits him. Here in Rome, approaching his destiny, he has become Keats again. The cart carries them through empty streets, past silent buildings, until at last they stop at the head of a great staircase, the Spanish Steps, though they won't be called that for some years yet. And there, facing the piazza, stands a mottled old building, number 26 Piazza di Spagna, the house where John Keats drew his final breath. The narrator coughs blood again as Hunt helps him down the steps, past Bernini's boat-shaped fountain gurgling in the twilight, and through that dark doorway. He thinks of Dante's inscription over the gates of hell, "Abandon all hope," and knows with quiet certainty why the Corps has brought him here. They want him to die, and they want Hunt to witness it. Meanwhile, far across the stars, Sol Weintraub stands before the blazing Sphinx, shaking his fist at a universe that has taken his daughter. The Shrike accepted baby Rachel from his trembling hands, and then vanished into light so brilliant it pushed him back like a physical force. Now the time tombs glow with eerie radiance, and something moves in the doorway of the Jade Tomb. Sol runs toward it, hoping against hope, but the figure that emerges is not his daughter. It's Braun Lamia, stumbling and confused, returned from wherever that silver cable took her consciousness. Sol catches her as she falls, cradling her head, and though his heart breaks with disappointment, he speaks gently. "It's all right," he tells her. "You're back." And on God's Grove, the Templars discover that faith in allies can be fatally misplaced. Despite promises of protection, ouster weapons rain fire upon the sacred forests. 3-kilometre walls of flame consume everything, and as Sek Hardin pushes Father Duré through the Farcaster to safety, the World Tree itself explodes into an inferno. The portal closes behind Duré, cutting off the heel of his shoe, and he tumbles into darkness as an entire world burns behind him. In Rome, in that narrow room at 26 Piazza di Spagna, our narrator lies dying. The tuberculosis that claimed John Keats 2 centuries before now consumes this body built from the poet's very essence, and the night stretches on, endless and fever-dark, punctuated only by the soft burbling of Bernini's fountain in the piazza below and the tolling of church bells from Santa Trinita dei Monti. The fever lies upon him like a sodden blanket, heavy and suffocating. His skin burns and then grows clammy, and twice during the night he is seized by terrible coughing spasms, bringing up blood that stains the damask sheets. Poor Leigh Hunt does what he can, but there is little to be done for a dying man in a reconstructed Rome, on a duplicate Earth, somewhere in the Magellanic Cloud. Sometime after 2 a.m, sleep finally comes, and with it, a dream unlike any before. The narrator finds himself rising through layers of reality, through the datasphere, through the megasphere, and into something new. He calls it the metasphere, a place of infinite spaces and unhurried colours, with no horizons, no ceilings, no solid ground. It feels like pure potential, boundless freedom, everything that exists and might exist flowing together in soft pastels and cloud-like forms. But something else moves in that vast space. Something large and dark approaches from beyond the edge of sight, something that knows his name, that holds his life in one palm and death in the other. There is nowhere to hide, and all the while, the song of pain rises from the world he left behind, the suffering of everyone everywhere, the specific agony of those impaled on the Shrike's terrible tree, the grief of Sol Weintraub, the fear of Braun Lamia. Hunt shakes him awake from this nightmare, and the 2 men talk through the small hours. The narrator finally tells Hunt everything about the poet John Keats, about his birth in 1795 and his death from consumption in this very room in 1821, about how the narrator awoke here once before, took the name Joseph Seven, and has been dreaming the lives of the Shrike Pilgrims ever since. Hunt asks if perhaps these dreams could be used to communicate, to warn Gladstone or the others, but the narrator knows this is impossible. Even if he could reach them, what good would it do? They are stranded in a distant galaxy, centuries of travel from anyone who might help. Meanwhile, far across time and space, Colonel Kassad lies wounded after his battle with the Shrike. Manita pulls him through a golden portal, and they emerge into blazing light beneath a sky filled with more stars than Kassad has ever seen. They stand at the center of the galaxy, in humanity's far future, surrounded by the most extraordinary people. These future humans have adapted in countless ways, some tall and thin with flowing energy manes, others small with delicate fairy wings, still others armoured like insects or furred like great cats. Yet for all their differences, they remain unmistakably human. A giant healer tends to Kassad's wounds, running silver-coated hands over his slashed arms and severed tendon, and when the Colonel wakes, he is whole again. But there is no time to marvel at this strange future. Manetta opens another portal, and they step through to find themselves back at the time tombs on Hyperion. Night has fallen, and through the swirling dust storm, Kassad sees Sol Weintraub and Braun Lamia down the valley, unaware that the Shrike moves toward them through the shadows. Despite Manetta's warning that another fight will kill him, Kassad retrieves his assault rifle and walks forward to protect his friends. Elsewhere, Governor General Theo Lane awakens aboard the consul's ship to the sound of piano music. He finds the ship open to brilliant sunlight, the consul playing for an audience of ousters on a terraformed asteroid. And these ousters, they are nothing like the propaganda promised. They are beautiful, varied, some with wings and some with fur, all of them unmistakably human despite their differences. Gladstone sends a desperate message, begging the consul to negotiate, to find out why the ousters are attacking, whether they would meet with her, whether peace might still be possible. And the consul, this man who has betrayed everyone, prepares to face judgment from the people he once promised to help. A boat descends from an impossible waterfall that climbs into the stars, coming to carry them to whatever awaits. The morning light filters through the narrow windows of that small room in Rome, and our dying narrator awakens to find Leigh Hunt bringing breakfast from some phantom trattoria downstairs. Food appears, hot and waiting, yet no one tends the kitchen. It is one of the quiet mysteries of this recreated Earth, this duplicate hidden away in the Magellanic Cloud. But Hunt's face carries a different concern entirely. He had stepped outside, hoping perhaps to find people, a telephone, some connection to the world they left behind. Instead, he found something waiting at the bottom of the Spanish steps. The Shrike, that terrible creature of blades and thorn, stands sentinel in the shadows below. It has followed them here, though not, the narrator suspects, to harm them. Rather, it waits like a guardian, ensuring there will be no escape, no alternative place for this borrowed body to spend its final hours. The day passes slowly, fever rising and falling like tides, sunlight creeping across rough plaster walls. And through it all, the narrator experiences something extraordinary. The pain of the universe floods into his fevered mind, the suffering of countless souls, the agony of those impaled on the Shrike's terrible tree, and his dying brain transforms it all into verse. Poetry flows through him like water through a stream bed, sometimes gentle as a flute's melody, sometimes cacophonous as orchestra's tuning, but always, always words. Hunt asks if perhaps there might be a way to send a message through the datasphere, to warn Gladstone, to tell someone where they are. The narrator knows the core would never permit it, but touched by Hunt's hand holding his, by that simple human connection, he promises to try. Meanwhile, far across time and space, Colonel Kassad battles the Shrike with devastating fury. He fires his assault rifle at full power, melting the sand beneath the creature into molten glass, driving it down into a bubbling lake of fire. The Shrike bellows, a sound like dragons mixed with rocket engines, and shifts through time to escape. Kassad follows, their battle carrying them onto a wind wagon crossing the sea of grass, blood spattering the walls as blades find flesh. And back at the time tombs, Soul and Brawn stand alone in the howling dust storm, watching the strange violence fade. Brawn's neural shunt is gone forever, her connection to Johnny severed, yet she remembers something from the megasphere, a connection between the Shrike Palace and that terrible thorn tree. She sets off alone into the wind, determined to find a way to save Martin Silenus, while Soul keeps his vigil at the Sphinx, waiting, hoping for Rachel's return. And now, our dying narrator makes a desperate choice. Rather than lie there through the endless night, listening to the fountain's gentle murmur and waiting for the next hemorrhage to claim him, he allows his consciousness to drift into the datasphere one final time. The metasphere greets him first, that strange realm of vastness and shadow that exists beyond the familiar landscapes of human data networks. It frightens him, this empty place, but he presses on, diving down through spinning darkness into the megasphere where the core intelligences dwell. Something has changed here, something terrible. Where Braun Lamia once perceived a thriving ecosystem of artificial minds, our narrator finds only chaos. Great forests of AI consciousness have been burned away, or swept aside by forces beyond comprehension. Civil war rages through the core, and he flees like a lost bird through ruins, desperately seeking the one intelligence who might answer his questions. Amun finds him instead, or rather, swallows him. The great AI enfolds our narrator in a bubble of force, and there, in that strange captivity, truths begin to unfold like flowers opening at dawn. The TechnoCore, Amun reveals, exists within the Farcaster network itself, not beside it, not connected to it, but actually living in the spaces between portals. Every time a human steps through a Farcaster, they pass through the core's home without ever knowing, and the datasphere, that vast network humanity believes serves them, actually harvests human minds. 200 billion brains, each contributing their neurons to the core's computing power, all unknowing. But there is more, so much more. Old Earth was never destroyed, not truly. The core moved it, hid it away in the Magellan Cloud, and there it waits still. The stables preserved it, against the wishes of other factions, out of something that might almost be called sentiment. And now the war makes sense. The ultimates wish to die, to be replaced by the god they are creating. The volatiles wish to destroy humanity entirely, and the stables, they simply wish to survive. Amun speaks of the human deity too, that consciousness which fled backward through time to escape the war between mechanical and organic gods. It hides somewhere, in someone, and both ultimate intelligences have sent the Shrike to find it. The Tree of Thorns, that terrible structure where victims writhe in eternal agony, broadcasts pain across the cosmos like a whistle only gods can hear, hoping to draw the empathy out of hiding. And our narrator, he was meant to be the vessel, the joining of human and machine, the chosen one. But he refuses. For the third and final time, cast out from the megasphere, tumbling through digital chaos, he wakes in his blood-soaked bed in Rome. Hunt rushes in, alarmed, caring, and with what little strength remains, our narrator whispers that he has things to tell, wonderful things, though not so much time to tell them. He is merely a poet, dying far from home. And so we come to the fate of Colonel Fedman Kassad, the soldier who spent his life chasing a phantom lover across battlefields and through dreams, still locked in combat with the Shrike, still bleeding from wounds that would have killed any ordinary man. Kassad feels time lurch beneath him like a ship in heavy seas. When the vertigo clears, he finds himself somewhere entirely different. Somewhere, when entirely different. The valley of the time tombs stretches before him, but transformed beyond recognition. Where once there was desert and dead stone, now forests grow to the valley's edge. A living city rises in the distance, its towers and domes catching the soft amber light of evening. Meadows of tall grass ripple in gentle breezes, and the tombs themselves stand gleaming, newly built, wrapped in gold, surrounded by strange machinery. Kassad understands immediately. He has travelled forward, perhaps centuries, perhaps millennia. The tombs are being prepared for their long journey backward through time, the journey that will eventually deliver them to his own era. But it is what lies behind him that truly takes his breath away. Thousands of warriors stand in silent ranks upon the grassy hillside, men and women of every possible form, some in skin suits like his own, others bearing the exotic modifications he witnessed when Moneta brought him to be healed. They wait there, patient, watching him with something like reverence. And between Kassad and this army stands Moneta herself, wearing a black velvet jumpsuit with a red scarf at her throat, a slender weapon across her shoulder. She looks at him with wonder, with awe, and with no recognition whatsoever. She does not know him. This is their first meeting, for her. She is just beginning the journey that will take her backward through time, the journey during which she will become his phantom lover, appearing to him on battlefields across the centuries, always knowing things she should not know, always loving him with a familiarity he could never quite understand. Now, finally, he understands. They have been moving in opposite directions through time. Every moment they shared, every battle, every embrace. She was approaching her beginning while he approached his end. She tells him he is the one, the warrior she has prophesied to her people. And when Kassad speaks her name, Moneta, she explains that it is a good name, meaning both daughter of memory and admonisher. But it is not yet hers. She tells him her true name, the name she will eventually leave behind. Kassad looks across the valley to where the Shrike stands motionless, and behind it, legion upon legion of other Shrikes, thousands of the creatures, perhaps tens of thousands, gleaming in the low sunlight like an army of living razors. A war, Moneta confirms. A few thousand against a few thousand, on 10 million worlds. A final battle that will determine whether the Shrike goes alone to haunt humanity's past, or whether humankind will have a say in its own destiny. Kassad does not fully understand the stakes, but then he reflects with weary wisdom. Soldiers rarely understand the political situation. They simply fight. He leans forward, kisses the surprised Moneta, and takes her red scarf. He ties it to the barrel of his assault rifle like a pennant, and strides forward to face the waiting army of Shrikes. "For liberty!" he shouts, raising the rifle and scarf high above his head. 3,000 voices answer him. The roar does not end with the final word. Kassad charges. Behind him, Moneta follows. Thousands follow. Later, when the carnage is done, they find Kassad's body still wrapped in a death embrace with the battered Shrike. They carry him with care, wash and tend to his ravaged form, and bear him through the mourning multitudes to the crystal monolith. There they lay him on a bier of white marble, weapons at his feet, the valley filled with firelight and song as flying craft descend through the lapis lazuli sky. Moneta makes her farewells and enters the Sphinx to begin her long vigil backward through time. The tombs glow with fierce light, the crowds retreat before waves of anti-entropic force, and slowly, shimmering from gold to bronze, the great tombs begin their journey back through the centuries, toward Kassad's time and beyond. Braun Lamia struggles through sand and static lightning, fighting her way up the valley. She sees golden light spilling from the crystal monolith and cannot help but investigate. Inside, she finds Kassad lying in state, dressed in formal black, hands crossed on his chest, weapons at his feet. A young woman kneels beside the bier, surrounded by flickering containment fields and strange refracting light. "Moneta," Braun whispers, recognizing her from Kassad's story told during their long journey. The young woman raises her head, meets Braun's eyes, and nods. But before Braun can speak, the time tides surge, and when she looks again, Moneta is gone. Only Kassad remains, silent in death, at peace at last. Braun turns back into the howling storm, following the distant screams from the thorn tree, heading toward whatever terrible reckoning awaits at the Shrike Palace. And so we come to one of the most tender and sorrowful passages in our tale, the death of a poet and the quiet courage of those left behind. Leigh Hunt had never watched anyone die before. Through that long final day and night with the man he had known as Joseph Seven, but who now thought of himself as John Keats, Hunt learned what it meant to witness a soul's departure from the world. The hemorrhages came frequently, terrible bouts of coughing and retching, and between them Hunt could hear the awful sound of fluid in Keats's lungs as the poet fought for each breath. Hunt sat beside the bed in that small front room on the Piazza di Spagna, listening, writing down everything Keats whispered between spasms of fever. The dying Cybrid spoke of vast things, of metaspheres and lost divinities, of the responsibilities poets bear, of a civil war raging within the TechnoCore itself. And then, through his pain, Keats revealed something vital. The core, he gasped, lived like spiders in a web, spiders weaving, letting humanity build the Farcaster network for them, then trussing and draining their creators like flies. Hunt's pen stopped moving as understanding dawned. The TechnoCore existed within the Farcaster system itself, hiding in the spaces between portals, feeding on human minds. "Tell your leader," Keats urged him. "Have Gladstone tear it out. Rip it out!" Through the long afternoon. Keats drifted between sleep and something closer to death. The slightest sound would jolt him awake, set him wrestling for air once more. By sunset he had grown too weak to clear his own throat, and Hunt had to help him, holding the basin, watching helplessly as this brilliant mind slowly extinguished. During one of Keats's fitful naps, Hunt walked to the window and saw something tall and sharp-edged standing in the shadows across the piazza. The Shrike, waiting. Later that evening, Keats awoke and looked at Hunt with strange clarity, as if seeing someone else beyond him. He asked if Hunt had ever watched anyone die, and when Hunt said no, Keats replied with gentle courage that he pitied him. "What trouble you have got into for me," he said. "Now you must be firm, for it will not last long." Keats spoke of his purpose then, explaining that the core had tried to make him accept godhood, to become a vessel for the empathy component of humanity's ultimate intelligence. But he had refused. He was not the one who comes, but the one who comes before, not the baptized, but the Baptist. With trembling hands, Hunt wrote down the final poetry Keats dictated, words about knowledge enormous making a god of oneself, about names and deeds and grey legends pouring into the wide hollows of the brain, about becoming immortal. Beautiful words from a dying man who had refused divinity. 3 more painful hours passed. Once, Keats pulled at Hunt's sleeve and whispered that after his death, the Shrike would not harm him. "It waits for me," he said. And near the very end, Keats asked to be buried in Rome's Protestant cemetery, near the pyramid of Caius Cestius. Hunt was standing at the window, staring at shadows beyond the Spanish steps, when the rasping breath behind him faltered and stopped. Keats gasped out his final words, asking to be lifted up, saying he was dying, telling Hunt not to be frightened, to be firm, and to thank God it had come. Then the terrible struggle for breath eased into something gentler, and when Hunt returned with fresh water, John Keats was gone. Come morning, Hunt wrapped the small body in fresh linens and carried it outside. A horse and cart waited in the piazza, as if summoned by forces beyond understanding. Hunt walked alongside as the carriage moved slowly through the abandoned streets of Rome, and when he glanced back, the Shrike followed at a distance, matching their pace, an unlikely mourner in this strange funeral procession. They found the Protestant cemetery at last, more pasture than graveyard, with sheep grazing among overgrown headstones. A fresh grave had been dug, and a blank stone stood ready. Hunt buried his friend there, unable to find words for a eulogy, settling instead for a moment of silence and the work of shoveling earth. With a laser pen left atop the headstone, Hunt inscribed what Keats had requested, a drawing of a Greek lyre with broken strings, and beneath it the legend, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." No dates, no name, only those words of beautiful melancholy. Meanwhile, across the web, events moved toward their climax. CEO Gladstone received confirmation that the ousters were not behind the invasion, that the core itself orchestrated the attacks. Admiral Lee's transmission showed ouster bodies self-destructing like cybrids, proving they were somehow artificial, and Father Duré, recovering in the government house infirmary, received a dream vision of his own. A young man walked beside him on an English hillside, past Lake Windermere, with mountains rising beyond. John, the stranger called himself, and he told Duré that someone would come after, someone who would teach. Duré's task, like the young man's own, was to prepare the way. Then the stranger urged Duré to leave at once, to return to Pacem immediately. Duré woke in his hospital bed, knowing it had been more than a dream. Despite his healing burns and the medic's protests, he wrapped himself in a blanket and shuffled off to find a Farcaster, driven by an urgency he could not explain. And Hunt, after burying Keats, searched desperately for a way home. He found a Farcaster portal humming in the centre of the Colosseum, but it would not let him through. He threw himself against its surface again and again, until his shoulders ached and his fingers bled, but it remained as solid as stone. Then, as moonlight filled the ancient arena, something emerged from that stubborn portal, an arm, a leg, and then people stepping through. Hunt's shouts of joy echoed off the crumbling walls, for he was no longer alone. And now, the moment everything changes, the fall of the Farcasters, the narrator, poor Keats, finds himself thrust from his cooling body into the metasphere, naked and exposed, struggling to hold together the tattered fragments of his consciousness. He has refused godhood, chosen mortality, but he still has work to do before he can rest. The metasphere terrifies him now. Vast shapes move beyond dark horizons, and the Shrike's presence burns like flame on black velvet wherever old Earth lies. The core summons him, but he remembers watching Umman destroy the other Keats, squeezing that analog persona until it simply dissolved. No, he cannot go there. So he slips through the dark tunnels of the datasphere, delivering final messages to Father Duré, appearing in a dream of Scottish Highlands, urging the priest to flee, to Gladstone, giving her what she needs to know. The core exists within the Farcaster network itself, and to destroy one, You must destroy the other. Meanwhile, aboard the torch ship Stephen Hawking, General Morpurgo prepares for what may be humanity's final gamble. He and 4 volunteers, including his own son, carry the Core's Death One device toward the Hyperion portal. They know they may not survive the translation. And then Gladstone speaks. Her voice reaches across the entire web, every world, every ship, every datasphere channel simultaneously. She tells them the truth. The Core is behind the invasion. The Core has always lived in the dark spaces between Farcaster portals. As long as the web exists, they will be our masters. Then, the impossible happens. 263 singularity containment spheres, connecting more than 72 million Farcaster portals, are destroyed within 2.6 seconds of each other. The Stephen Hawking vanishes between portals as both entrance and exit are expertly destroyed, the Death One device detonating harmlessly in whatever strange geography exists between. The web simply ceases to be. The datasphere vanishes. Families find themselves separated by light years. Children at school become unreachable for years. The river Tethys stops flowing, its water spilling out to dry under 200 different suns. Chaos erupts across every world. On Tau Ceti Center, Gladstone walks out to face the mob. 3 million people press against the containment fields, hungry for someone to blame. She raises her arms, embraces them, and the fields drop. For one eternal moment she stands alone against that tide of rage, and then they close around her. The consul, Theo, and Arendez watch the reports flood in from their ship, and then even the fat line goes silent. A strange voice speaks across all channels, telling humanity that this medium is being misused, that access will be restored when they understand what it is truly for. The void which binds has spoken, and humanity finds itself truly alone for the first time in centuries. The consul pours another drink and quotes an old Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." Below them, Hyperion turns slowly, blue and white and waiting, as they descend toward whatever fate remains. And now we come to the reconciliation, the moment when everything that has been broken begins to mend. The narrator, that fragment of Keats who refused godhood and chose mortality, escapes the dying datasphere just as it collapses entirely. He watches the megasphere devour itself, like some maddened creature consuming its own body, until nothing remains but snapping jaws closing on emptiness. The metasphere endures, but it has become a wilderness now. Dark forests of unknown time and space, strange sounds in the eternal night, but Hyperion still glows. The time tombs blaze like white beacons through the gathering darkness, and our poet drifts toward them. He has been the one who comes before, appearing in dreams, delivering messages. Now, it is time to do something more. Sol Weintraub waits on the steps of the Sphinx. Hours have passed since he handed his daughter to the Shrike. Days since he has eaten or slept. Time tides have battered him like ocean waves, yet still he clings to those ancient stones and waits. In his exhaustion, Sol's mind turns over the great question that has haunted him for years. The story of Abraham, commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac. Sol had always argued that modern humanity must refuse such commands, that the era of sacrifice in God's name had passed. Yet here he stands, having given his child to a creature of death. And then, understanding dawns. Abraham was not simply obeying, he was testing God. By his willingness to sacrifice what he loved most, Abraham forced the divine to prove itself worthy of worship. The deity had to stop the knife, had to earn the right to be the God of Abraham. It was not blind obedience, but the most profound act of faith imaginable. Sol realizes something else now. The machine ultimate intelligence, with all its vast power, fundamentally misunderstands empathy. It sees that humans respond to suffering, so it broadcasts pain through its terrible tree of thorns, hoping to lure out the hidden aspect of humanity's own godhead. But empathy is not merely a response to pain. Empathy and love are inseparable. They cannot be used as bait because they are not tools at all. Love, Sol understands now, is woven into the very fabric of reality, the void which binds, that mysterious force connecting all things across space and time, is nothing more or less than love itself. It explains the anthropic principle, all those impossible coincidences that allowed the universe to exist in just the right way for consciousness to emerge. Not random chance, but love, hardwired into creation from the beginning. Meanwhile, deep within the Sphinx, the narrator watches the Shrike carry newborn Rachel toward a portal to the distant future. The creature's bladed fingers have already cut the infant's delicate skin. There is no time for hesitation. The narrator has no physical form, but he remembers the Mobius cube lying abandoned on the Sphinx's porch. Inside it waits an erg, a creature that controls force fields through something very close to empathy. He releases it, merges with its energy, and suddenly John Keats has substance again. He takes the baby from the Shrike's hands and steps back. The creature whirls in fury, but it stands too close to the temporal flow. Without moving, it recedes down the drain of time, steel jaws snapping on nothing until it vanishes entirely. But the narrator cannot carry Rachel back against the current, so he waits, bouncing the crying infant gently, whispering nonsense poetry into her tiny ear. Outside, Sol sees a figure emerge from the blazing doorway, a woman carrying something precious. His heart nearly stops when he recognizes her. Rachel, his daughter Rachel, grown and healthy, carrying her infant self in her arms. She explains that she was chosen, raised in a distant future where humanity's final war still rages. She travels backward through time with the tombs, keeping the Shrike in check. The Merlin's sickness that stole her memories prepared her for this journey. Father and daughter embrace one last time. Then Rachel steps back into the light, calling out that familiar childhood farewell. See you later, alligator. After a while, Crocodile, and Sol, holding his newborn daughter close, prepares to follow her into tomorrow. 5.5 months have passed since the fall of the Farcasters, and we find ourselves drifting gently northward, aboard a morning dirigible, watching the rebuilt capital of Hyperion grow small beneath us. Braun Lamia travels alone with her thoughts, 7 months pregnant now, carrying the child who will change everything. The city below, once called Keats, has become Jacktown to its residents. White buildings gleam in the spring light, and 3 million refugees have chosen to make this world their home. Ousters and humans walk the same streets now, drink at the same taverns, learning slowly to share a planet. She is travelling to the poet's city to say farewell to the consul. He departs tomorrow, returning to the scattered worlds of what was once the web. 20 hours by airship, drifting over familiar landscapes. The Kala locks pass beneath her in the morning light. The sea of grass unfolds at sunset like green velvet rippling in the breeze. A wind wagon catches the wind below, its lanterns swinging gently, wheel rumbling across the endless steppe. The poet's city has come alive again. Nearly 1,000 residents now, artists and dreamers drawn to this place where sad King Billy once gathered his court. Martin Silenus refuses the mayorship, twice now, yet somehow runs everything anyway. The old poet grumbles and curses, but the dead city is dead no longer. That evening, a farewell banquet fills the rebuilt pavilion with laughter. Later, a smaller gathering aboard the consul's ship. Wine and music and quiet conversation high on the balcony, looking out over the valley where the time tombs still glow. They speak of Sol and Rachel, vanished through the Sphinx's portal to the distant future. Of Kassad, whose tomb now draws young soldiers like pilgrims. Of the mysteries still unsolved, the Jade Tomb's connection to gas giant worlds, the Shrike Palace's door of light that leads, somewhere, perhaps to old Earth itself. And then, in the garden, Braun meets him at last. Not Johnny, not quite. His twin, the second Keats persona who saved baby Rachel from the Shrike. He appears in the shadows where monitors cannot see, solid-seeming but untouchable, wearing strange clothes from another century. He tells her what she carries, not merely a child, but the one who teaches, the junction of human spirit and AI logic that will change the universe. Whatever this daughter teaches, it will matter 10,000 years hence. Braun offers sanctuary. The consul's ship has an AI, and it needs a voice. At sunrise, the consul departs. His ship's computer speaks in verse now, reciting Keats instead of checklists. Braun waves fiercely at the rising ship, tears streaming freely, watching the ebony arrow climb toward the heavens on a column of blue flame. On he flared, and so ends our tale, for now. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the Fall of Hyperion, a story of sacrifice and transformation, of choices made in impossible moments, and of what it means to be truly human. We've travelled far together tonight, from the glittering parties of Tau Ceti Center, through the haunted valleys of the Time Tombs, to the very edge of human civilization itself. We've walked alongside pilgrims seeking answers, watched empires tremble and fall, and witnessed souls choosing mortality over godhood, connection over power. Perhaps that's what lingers most gently in the mind as we drift towards sleep. The quiet truth that even in the grandest of stories, it's the small human moments that matter most. A father cradling his daughter, a dying man's final words of love, the choice to remain imperfect, vulnerable, wonderfully mortal. The Time Tombs have closed their mysteries for now. The pilgrims have made their choices, and the web of worlds has fallen silent. But stories, like dreams, have a way of staying with us, weaving themselves into our rest, becoming part of who we are. If you've enjoyed drifting through this tale with me, and you'd like to return for more gentle journeys through the pages of remarkable books, you might consider pressing that subscribe button. It's a small thing, but it helps us continue creating these peaceful escapes together. For now, though, let the story settle softly around you like a warm blanket. Let the distant stars of the Hyperion system fade into the comfortable darkness behind your eyes. There's nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be. Just rest and breathe and let sleep carry you gently away. Sweet dreams, dear listener, until we meet again in another story on another peaceful night.